September 1944, in the heart of western France along the winding banks of the Loire River. Imagine commanding an army of nearly 20,000 soldiers, trapped like pieces on a chessboard with no moves left. That's the nightmare facing German General Botho Henning Elster. His forces are stranded, supplies dwindling, miles from any hope of reinforcement, as American tanks thunder ever closer. Surrender seems inevitable, but in the brutal theater of World War II, giving up could mean disgrace, retribution, or worse. Yet, what unfolds next isn't a tale of defeat, it's a masterstroke of humanity and strategy that saves countless lives and reshapes the final push through Europe. This is the untold story of the largest German surrender to U.S. forces in the West, and how General George S. Patton's unexpected choice turned the tide without a single bullet fired, proving that true leadership sometimes whispers louder than roars. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must rewind to the summer of 1944. The Allied invasion of Normandy in June had cracked the German defenses wide open. By August, Operation Cobra unleashed American forces in a blistering advance, with Patton's Third Army leading the charge. Patton, the audacious commander known for his lightning-fast maneuvers and unyielding drive, spearheaded a breakout that covered over 400 miles in just weeks. His tanks sliced through French countryside, bypassing pockets of resistance and severing German supply lines. Cities like Paris fell in rapid succession, and the once mighty Wehrmacht found itself fragmented and reeling. In this chaos, General Elster's command stood isolated in the southwest. Elster, a seasoned officer with roots in the Prussian military tradition, wasn't leading crack troops fresh from the Eastern Front. His force was a patchwork: administrative units, rear echelon personnel, engineers, and occupation garrisons, men more accustomed to maintaining order in occupied territories than engaging in high-stakes armored battles. They numbered around 19,000, including elements from the 159th Infantry Division and various support groups. But now, with the Loire River blocking their retreat and American patrols closing in from all sides, they were effectively encircled. The strategic map painted a dire picture. To the east, Patton's armored columns had already crossed the Seine and were pushing toward the German border. Allied air superiority meant any attempt at a breakout would be spotted and bombed into oblivion. French resistance fighters, emboldened by the liberation, were picking off stragglers and disrupting communications. Elster's men had fuel for perhaps a few days, ammunition running low, and morale teetering on the edge. Reports from scouts confirmed the worst: no friendly forces within reach, and the Allies controlling every bridge and ford. Elster weighed his options with the cool precision of a career soldier. First, a desperate push eastward to link up with German lines, suicidal against superior American firepower and air dominance. It would turn his ragtag group into sitting ducks for P-47 Thunderbolts and Sherman tanks. Second, scattering into the forests for partisan-style warfare, harassing Allied supply lines. But this would drag out the suffering, inviting reprisals from local French forces eager to settle scores after 4 years of occupation. It offered no path to victory, only prolonged agony. The third path: surrender. In the rigid hierarchy of the German military under Hitler, this was fraught with peril. Orders from Berlin demanded resistance to the last man, with surrender equated to betrayal. Officers who capitulated risked court-martial, and their families back home could face the regime's wrath. Yet Elster, at 50 years old and with a distinguished record from World War I, prioritized lives over ideology. He saw no honor in futile sacrifice. His troops held no strategic leverage. Fighting on would only inflate the war's grim tally. Determined to act, Elster initiated discreet contacts with American forward units through neutral channels, possibly involving local clergy or Swiss intermediaries. His proposal was bold: a mass surrender of his entire command, but with stipulations to ensure dignity and safety. He sought assurances that his soldiers would be handled as legitimate prisoners of war under the Geneva Conventions, protected from mistreatment, not turned over to vengeful French units, and processed with military decorum. This wasn't capitulation out of cowardice, it was a calculated bid for preservation. Word of this extraordinary offer climbed the chain of command, landing on Patton's desk. The Third Army's headquarters buzzed with debate. Some staff officers pushed for unconditional terms, Why bargain with a cornered foe? But Patton, ever the visionary tactician, recognized the windfall. Removing 20,000 enemy combatants from the field peacefully would free up resources for the drive into Germany, sparing American lives and accelerating the campaign. More profoundly, it aligned with a broader calculus. Fair treatment could snowball, prompting other beleaguered German units to follow suit rather than fight hopelessly. Patton greenlit the arrangement, instructing his subordinates to uphold international protocols strictly. No concessions beyond the conventions, but no indignities either, just efficient, respectful handling. This decision reflected Patton's multifaceted persona, the fierce warrior who also valued professional soldiery across lines. He knew that reputations in war spread like wildfire. A model surrender here could unlock doors elsewhere. As preparations unfolded, tension gripped both sides. On September 16, 1944, under a crisp autumn sky, Elster's columns assembled in orderly ranks. They marched toward designated points near Beaugency and Orleans, weapons shouldered, maintaining formation as a testament to discipline. American troops from the 83rd Infantry Division and supporting elements awaited, ready to receive them. The scene was one of solemn efficiency. Elster and his officers saluted, formally declaring the cessation of hostilities. U.S. commanders reciprocated, overseeing the disarmament and initial processing. What followed was a seamless operation. German soldiers, many relieved to escape certain doom, were searched, fed rations, and transported to holding areas. Medical teams tended to the wounded, and interpreters facilitated communications. Elster himself was detained with the courtesy due his rank, later reflecting on the professionalism that eased his conscience. This event didn't just end a standoff, it broadcast a powerful signal. Whispers through German radio nets and captured documents soon revealed its ripple effects. Other commanders, hearing of the humane outcome, began contemplating similar paths. Surrenders trickled in, isolated battalions in Brittany, garrisons in the Loire Valley, each one a step toward hastening the war's end. Patton's foresight here added layers to his legacy. Often portrayed as the unrelenting aggressor, he demonstrated that strategic empathy could be as potent as armored thrusts. By honoring the rules of engagement, he not only saved lives but also undermined the Nazi narrative of inevitable doom, encouraging rational choices amid chaos. As the dust settled, Elster's men entered the POW system, many surviving to rebuild in peacetime. The general faced post-war scrutiny in Germany but was ultimately cleared, his actions deemed prudent. This chapter, rich with lessons on leadership and restraint, reminds us that in the fog of war, clarity often comes from unexpected quarters. The march toward capitulation began in late August 1944, when Elster received orders to consolidate scattered German units in southwestern France and lead them northward in what became known as March Group South. Starting from areas near Biarritz and Mont-de-Marsan, this ad hoc formation included Luftwaffe ground personnel, naval detachments, Wehrmacht administrative troops, engineers, and even small contingents of foreign volunteers, hardly the elite panzer divisions that defined earlier German successes. They carried limited heavy weapons, perhaps 600 vehicles at the outset, thousands of horses for transport, and supplies that dwindled with every mile. The journey northward turned into a grueling ordeal. Allied aircraft from the 9th Air Force and RAF Tactical Air Force roamed unchallenged, spotting columns from high altitude and diving in with rockets and bombs. On September 7 near Châteauroux, a devastating strike claimed around 400 lives, destroyed dozens of trucks, and scattered horses in panic. French resistance groups, the Maquis, struck relentlessly, ambushing stragglers, sabotaging roads, and cutting telegraph lines. Elster's force stretched out over miles, more a desperate refugee column than a fighting formation. Fuel ran critically low, ammunition for anything beyond small arms became scarce. Attempts to push east toward the Belfort Gap failed as Allied advances sealed those routes. By early September, escape to Germany appeared impossible. Patton's Third Army had surged far beyond the Loire, linking up with forces from Operation Dragoon in the south. The river itself formed a natural barrier, with bridges damaged or guarded. Elster, a pragmatic officer shaped by old-school military values rather than fervent Nazism, recognized the futility. Continued resistance would mean pointless slaughter, his men picked off by air strikes, harassed by partisans, or starved into submission. Hitler's standing orders branded surrender as treason, punishable by death for the commander and reprisals against families. Yet Elster weighed the scales: honor in futile death versus responsibility for 20,000 lives. Initial feelers went out through local intermediaries, perhaps priests, civilians, or Maquis contacts who could relay messages without immediate betrayal. On September 8, word reached Lieutenant Samuel W. McGill, a young reconnaissance platoon leader with the 329th Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Infantry Division. McGill, operating ahead of the main lines along the Loire's north bank, listened as emissaries described a massive German column willing to lay down arms, but only to Americans, not to French forces who might exact revenge for occupation brutalities. The proposal climbed rapidly to Major General Robert C. Macon, commander of the 83rd Thunderbolt Division, tasked with securing the Loire flank for Patton's broader advance. Macon consulted higher headquarters. Approval came swiftly. Patton's staff saw the strategic prize, neutralizing nearly 20,000 enemies without expending ammunition or risking American casualties. The Third Army's lightning pace had already bypassed pockets like this one. Accepting an organized surrender would free troops for the push toward Germany while demonstrating that capitulation brought fair treatment rather than vengeance. Negotiations unfolded carefully over days. Elster sought guarantees. His men would be treated as POWs under Geneva rules, no summary executions, no handover to partisan groups, proper medical care for the wounded, and dignified processing. He requested a formal military ceremony to preserve some semblance of order among his troops. In return, he offered the intact column, officers, enlisted men, vehicles, horses, artillery pieces, and small arms, all without a fight. The Americans agreed to core terms, emphasizing adherence to international law. No extraordinary concessions, but no humiliations either. To underscore capability and discourage tricks, a flight of P-47 Thunderbolts circled overhead during key meetings, a visible reminder of air dominance. Elster, aware his force could be annihilated if talks failed, accepted. On September 16 to 17, 1944, the climax unfolded near Beaugency, where the Loire's damaged bridge stood as a symbolic dividing line. Elster's columns converged from multiple routes, maintaining discipline despite exhaustion. They formed up on the south bank in ranks, officers at the front. American units from the 83rd Division positioned themselves opposite, weapons ready but not aggressive. At 3:30 p.m. on the 17th, the formal exchange began. Elster stepped forward with his staff, saluted Major General Macon, and presented his pistol as a token of surrender. He declared his command's capitulation to the United States Army. Macon accepted professionally, reciprocating the salute. No speeches of triumph or defeat, just efficient military protocol. What followed was a model operation. Over 19,000 men, precisely 754 officers, 18,850 enlisted, plus 2 women auxiliaries, marched across in formation. They stacked arms, surrendered equipment, 400 trucks, 1,000 horse-drawn wagons, 2,000 horses, thousands of weapons including machine guns, mortars, and light artillery. American soldiers oversaw the process calmly. Searches for hidden arms, initial medical checks, distribution of water and rations. The Germans, many expecting the worst after years of propaganda about Allied atrocities, encountered instead orderly treatment. Firm, professional, humane. Word of this event traveled fast through prisoner interrogations, intercepted messages, and rumors among remaining German pockets. Isolated commanders in Brittany, the Vosges foothills, and other bypassed areas heard how a major general had handed over an army-sized force peacefully, and lived to tell about it. Requests to surrender to the Americans increased, often specifying avoidance of French custody. This pattern eased pressure on Allied lines, allowing faster consolidation and fewer mopping-up battles. For Elster personally, the decision carried heavy personal risk. A Nazi court condemned him to death in absentia the following March for unauthorized capitulation. Yet he survived in U.S. custody, repatriated in 1947, and lived quietly until 1952. He never publicly regretted his choice, viewing it as the only moral path in an impossible situation. Patton's role, while indirect, he wasn't on site, proved decisive. His aggressive advance created the encirclement that forced Elster's hand, and his command philosophy ensured the surrender terms were honored. The Third Army's reputation for following the rules encouraged capitulations elsewhere, saving lives on both sides and shortening the grind through France. This episode stands as more than a footnote in the liberation of France. It illustrates how professionalism in defeat can outshine fanaticism, how strategic mercy aligns with battlefield efficiency, and how one rational act amid chaos can echo far beyond its immediate bounds. The largest peaceful German handover to U.S. forces in the West wasn't born of weakness, but of calculated wisdom on both sides, proving that even in total war, humanity and strategy can converge to end bloodshed sooner. The surrender of General Botho Henning Elster's command on September 17, 1944, stands as one of the most significant peaceful capitulations of World War II in the Western theater. Nearly 19,000 German soldiers, 754 officers and over 18,000 enlisted men, along with 2 female Wehrmacht auxiliaries, marched into American lines in disciplined columns. They brought with them an astonishing array of equipment, roughly 400 motor vehicles, more than 1,000 horse-drawn wagons, around 2,000 horses still serviceable despite the grueling march, thousands of small arms, dozens of machine guns, mortars, light field guns, and even a handful of anti-tank weapons. This was no ragged mob fleeing in panic, it was a functioning military organization choosing to end its participation in the war. American troops from the 83rd Infantry Division, supported by elements of the 9th Army and 3rd Army reconnaissance units, handled the reception with textbook efficiency. Processing stations sprang up along the north bank of the Loire near Beaugency and Orleans. Soldiers were searched methodically for concealed weapons, then grouped by unit to maintain cohesion and simplify record-keeping. Wounded men received immediate medical attention from U.S. Army medics. The seriously ill were evacuated to field hospitals. Rations, standard C rations and captured German supplies, were distributed to prevent immediate hunger. Water points kept everyone hydrated during the long hours of intake. The contrast with what many Germans had been told to expect could not have been starker. Nazi propaganda had painted Allied forces, particularly Americans, as vengeful and barbaric. Yet here the prisoners encountered calm professionalism. No mass reprisals, no looting of personal effects beyond standard searches, no public humiliation. Officers retained their sidearms briefly during formalities before surrendering them, a small but meaningful gesture of respect for rank. Elster himself was treated as befitted a general officer, separated early for interrogation but housed appropriately and questioned courteously. Word of this orderly handover spread rapidly through the shrinking pockets of German resistance still holding out in France. Captured radio traffic, prisoner interrogations, and even clandestine messages between isolated commanders carried the news. A major general had surrendered an army-sized force to the Americans, and every man had been fed, medically treated if needed, and processed without violence. French resistance fighters, though frustrated at being denied direct custody of the prisoners, were instructed by Allied command to stand down. The Americans honored their agreement to keep the Germans out of partisan hands. The strategic payoff materialized almost immediately. In the weeks following September 17, surrenders of smaller German units accelerated across bypassed regions. Garrisons in Brittany, coastal strongpoints along the Atlantic Wall that had been left behind by the main advance, coastal artillery batteries, supply depots in the Massif Central, all began sending emissaries under white flags. Many explicitly requested transfer to American rather than French control, citing reports of the Elster Group's treatment. By late September and into October, thousands more Germans laid down arms peacefully, sparing Allied troops the costly house-to-house fighting that had characterized earlier clearances. This pattern had a compounding effect on the broader campaign. Patton's Third Army, freed from the need to divert divisions for mopping up operations, maintained momentum toward the German border. Supply lines stretched thinner with every mile, but fewer combat losses meant more trucks and fuel available for the spearheads. Casualty rates for American infantry units tasked with reducing isolated pockets dropped noticeably in sectors where surrender became the norm rather than the exception. The cumulative savings in blood and time helped compress the timetable for reaching the Siegfried Line, even as autumn rains and overstretched logistics began to slow the Allied advance. For General Elster, the aftermath brought both relief and lingering shadow. He spent the remainder of the war in U.S. prisoner-of-war camps, first in France, then transferred to facilities in the United States. Conditions were austere but adhered to Geneva standards: adequate food, shelter, medical care, and eventual access to reading material and limited recreation. He cooperated fully during interrogations, providing valuable intelligence on German rear area organization without betraying military secrets that could endanger lives. Repatriated in 1947, he returned to a divided Germany still grappling with denazification and reconstruction. In 1950, a West German court reviewed his case under the provisions that allowed examination of wartime capitulations. Prosecutors argued that Elster had violated standing orders by surrendering without exhausting every means of resistance. The defense countered with exhaustive documentation. Air supremacy made movement impossible, supplies were exhausted, encirclement was total, and further fighting would have achieved nothing beyond mass death. The court agreed. Elster was acquitted, his action deemed the only responsible course under the circumstances. He lived quietly in Hanover until his death in 1952, rarely speaking publicly about the events but privately maintaining that the professional conduct of his American captors had made the decision psychologically bearable. Patton's indirect influence on this outcome reveals a dimension of his leadership often overshadowed by tales of armored charges and fiery speeches. He never set foot near the lawyer during the surrender. He issued no personal directives to Elster. Yet the aggressive pace of his Third Army created the strategic trap that left Elster no viable alternative. More importantly, the command climate Patton fostered, respect for the laws of war, insistence on proper prisoner handling, ensured that when the opportunity arose, his subordinates knew exactly how to respond. Fair treatment wasn't charity. It was doctrine that turned potential enemies into non-combatants and multiplied the effectiveness of every mile gained. The Elster surrender, therefore, transcends a single battlefield event. It demonstrates that in modern total war, victory is measured not only by territory seized or enemies killed, but by how efficiently resistance can be neutralized with minimal cost. Offering a rational path to capitulation, backed by a reputation for honoring agreements, proved more powerful than unrelenting firepower in many cases. Thousands of German families welcomed sons and husbands home after the war instead of mourning them. Thousands of American soldiers lived to see VE Day because they never had to storm those final strongpoints. This story endures as a quiet testament to strategic wisdom. George Patton, the commander synonymous with attack, understood that sometimes the greatest blow is delivered by withholding violence, by creating conditions where the enemy sees surrender not as dishonor, but as the honorable conclusion to a lost campaign. In doing so, he helped shorten a war that had already claimed millions, reminding future generations that military genius lies not just in destruction, but in knowing when, and how, to accept peace. If this chapter of World War II history surprised you or made you think differently about leadership under pressure, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the decisions that shaped the conflict in ways textbooks often overlook. Drop a comment. Do you believe treating surrendering enemies with professionalism is primarily a moral choice, a strategic one, or both? Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.